After the Mexican-American War in 1848, everything that occurs is leading up to Civil War. So that's what the remainder of the material is about. So we'll look at this in two ways. First, what is the difference between the North and the South that will make them completely different? What are the economic differences? What are the demographic differences? What are the political differences? And that is what this lecture is about. In the next lecture, we'll look at the specific events that occurred between 48 and 1860 that'll lead to the Civil War. So first, how did they develop so different economically? Now, up until 1850, there were three distinct parts of the United States: the Northeast, the Northwest, and the South. The Northeast is what the future of the United States will look like. It is where business, manufacturing, trade and commerce, and banking and finance. Now, it was more urbanized. There were more cities. That's where most of the immigrants that were coming to the United States. But the majority of Americans are still farmers. It has more industry, but most people in the Northeast, they're still farmers. Most Americans will be farmers, and most Americans will be rural until 1920. So the North had a more balanced economy. The Northwest was a distinctly different region, and it had predominantly agriculture. But the kind of agriculture it had, because the South is also agriculture, but there are two different kinds of agriculture. In the Northwest, it was predominantly food products: cows, sheep, and especially corn and wheat. Now, the type of agriculture they had in the Northwest it's mechanized. That means there are machines to help you do the job like wheat. There are threshers to cut it all down. So what that means is one family can take care of like 100 acres. Also in the Northwest, they were not able to grow stuff like cotton. It did not have the right kind of soil. Now, up until 1850, the North and the Northwest were two distinctly different regions. And in fact, the Northwest had in common with the South because they traded more because of the Mississippi River. But between 1850 and 1860, that will all change. And that's because of the railroad. Railroads will connect the Northeast and the Northwest between 1850 and 1860 to make the Northeast and Northwest just the North, which will get much, much larger in terms of population, in terms of resources, and it will give the North all the advantages. So here's the United States in 1850, and you can see the rail lines. They're scattered and fragmented. In the far Northeast, there's the most. South, the West, there's not very many. That's 1850. By 1860, the entire Northeast and Northwest are totally connected. So there's more trade between the Northeast and Northwest. This is what will help determine who will win the Civil War. The Civil War almost started in 1850. We'll get to that later. And had it started in 1850, probably would have won. But because it happened in 1860, the North will just be so bigger, so much more powerful economically in terms of population, and also being able to transport the material to the battlefield. It's a constant problem the South will have. So the Northeast and Northwest will interconnected into be just the North. What about the South's economy? Just like the Northwest, the South was predominantly agriculture, but the difference is the kind of agriculture the South had was almost entirely staple crops, mass producing one crop to sell, and it was tobacco for a long time, but the most important one you must know is cotton, and this is so important to understand. Cotton is the reason for the Civil War, because cotton is the most important natural resource in the entire world. Cotton from the United States South throughout most of the 1800s, and is what all other foreign countries, European countries especially, wanted, and what they bought. And so the entire South's economy is geared around growing one thing and one thing only, cotton. And Southerners, they will base their entire system around this. Think of it like we have oil in the 1900s and into the 21st century. People are willing to kill and die for it. Most important natural resource. And the South, they truly believe they can start an entire new nation based on this one staple crop. The South, safely entrenched behind her cotton bags, can defy the world, for the civilized world depends on the cotton of the South. No power on earth dares to make war upon it. Cotton is king, and they truly believe that. Why would they believe that cotton would be so important? Because, again, it's the most important the world wants, but the entire U.S. economy depended on it. So by 1860, the eve of the Civil War, almost 60% of all U.S. exports is cotton. That means, I mentioned the Northeast, they had business, which includes trade and commerce. Northerners, they manufactured a lot of cotton. They exported it. And so this is the entire U.S. economy, not just the South's economy. So you can see it is vitally important to the entire U.S. economy. That is why the South will develop completely differently. And that is also why slavery is so fundamentally important to understand. Because you cannot separate cotton and slavery. There is no mechanization for cotton. It has to be hand-picked, which means cotton and slavery go hand in hand. You cannot separate two things. So as the amount of cotton being produced increases, as there's more demand for it, there will be a bigger and bigger demand for slavery and for slaves. So how can... That's the only way you can understand everything that leads up to the Civil War. And we know that the South, there are still people that say slavery was not important, and it was important because cotton was important. And we know how many slaves there were because this is just census data. States, they reported how many slaves there were. And certain states, they counted slaves accurately because they needed it for the 3/5 compromise so they could get more representation. Also tax records. So everything I'm saying is it's demographic and economic information, and you can look all this stuff up. Slavery, though, it will be fundamentally important to the Southern economy. That's why you cannot separate those two issues. So why exactly was slavery so important to the production of cotton? Only 25% of Southerners ever owned one slave. So that means a full 75% of Southerners never owned any slaves at all. So a vast majority of the Southern population. So how could it be so then? It's because I've mentioned this from the very beginning of the semester. The United States is land-rich, labor poor. It's huge. It's enormous. What's important in the South is not how much land you had. It's how much labor you had. So, a plot of land in 1860, or an acre of land in 1860 only cost $6 in Texas. Slave cost $1,600. So slaves are what you wanted if you were going to produce a lot of cotton. And the numbers are absolutely unequivocal about this. If you were a family with thousands of acres and you had, 4 kids, 5 kids, you would not produce nearly as much cotton as a family with less land but slaves. The amount of Southerners that are considered planters, a planter is someone that has 20 or more slaves, was only 4% of families. So only 4% of families are planters, but that 4% produced about 90% of all the cotton in the South. So having slaves, that is the most important thing in figuring out big cotton you're going to be able to produce. And so if you lived in the South, everyone's money went to buying more slaves. And so that is what the entire economy developed around. So the South will have only 10% of all manufacturing by the time we get to 1860. And it's not advanced manufacturing like weapons. It doesn't have any banking. It doesn't have anything you need to win a war. We'll create its economy completely around slavery. And so it does not have advanced economy. That is why in agricultural-based economies, they're never very equitable. They always have, wealth is always accumulated in a very, very small part of the population, which is what the South will have. It'll be incredibly economically underdeveloped, no manufacturing, much smaller population. And this is something that historians said after the fact. Even at the time, people knew this. There were Southerners that warned other Southerners, look, we've got a problem. We are not making stuff. Guy Hinton Helper, he wrote several books where he told the South over and over again, in one way or another, we are more or less subservient to the North every day of our lives. Infancy, we're sold in Northern Muslim. Childhood, we are humored with Northern boys. Youth, we're instructed out of Northern books. Decline life, we get Northern cycles. Everything advanced. Southerners had to import from the North. And they knew this, so the South stayed incredibly underdeveloped, and it was largely because of slavery.